Yeah, my name is Joe Warhol. Served 13 years in the United States Marine Corps. Enlisted in 2007. Ended up leaving service in 2020 officially. Did a tour in Afghanistan, kind of 2 campaigns, 2011, 12. But previous to that, I originally born and raised in Minnesota. Moved out here to Arizona to kind of go to school, play baseball, kind of do my own thing. But ended up kind of falling in line with a few buddies of mine who were going through the commissioning program in the Marine Corps, and kind of piqued my interest. I had always knew what like Marines were, grow up hearing and seeing the, Slaying the Dragon commercial for the Marine Corps, but never really thought much of it. I think my earliest recollection or memory of Marines was, I want to say it was like 1995, 96. We could look it up, but there was a whole 2020 news thing that came out where the video, one of the first videos ever kind of that was recorded of recon Marines getting their jump wings pinned on them. So when they got done getting their gold jump wings, they would get them smashed into their chest, and they're wearing white t-shirts, so of course blood was going everywhere, and a lot of people, social media thankfully didn't exist at the time, but people were kind of losing their minds about these Marines getting jump wings slammed into their chests and bleeding from it, and it became this whole ordeal where they had to kind of stop doing that. But I remember seeing that on the news. I was 12, 13, and I was like, oh, who are these guys? Like, man, these guys are badass, right? Getting jump wings even though they were getting injured.
Yeah.
And that was kind of my first, thing about the Marine Corps that I remember was those recon Marines. And then of course, I was a junior in high school on 9/11, so I remember that vividly. Senior in high school, 2003, I remember watching on the news, sitting in drafting class. Our drafting teacher was my baseball coach, and I was sitting in drafting class, and we were watching, I think, CNN or whatever news network was on TV in class at the time, and we were doing the Marine Corps, 1st Marine Division was doing the push into Baghdad, and I remember that vividly, but never really had much thought about joining the Marine Corps. Just as growing up in the Midwest wasn't really a thing, kind of middle, upper class suburbs of Twin Cities, Minnesota. Not really a lot of people joined the military at the time, so it wasn't really something I thought of doing until I moved to Arizona, met up with a few buddies who were going through the commissioning program, and thought, like, what, this is something I want to do.
So what age were you when you actually enlisted?
23. I turned 24 at Marine Corps Recruit Depot, San Diego, November 2008.
How would you summarize, because I know everybody has all these stories from boot camp and how fun it was, but what's like a quick summary of how your experience was in boot camp?
Stressful. I went into it with a very open mind and an understanding of, especially being 23 versus 17, 18. Mm-hmm. I knew what I was getting myself into, so I knew it was like, what, keep your mouth shut, keep your head down, just get through it. The quickest way out is just to get it over with. The 13 weeks. So that's what I did. I kept my mouth shut. Had the opportunity to fill a few kind of leadership positions while at boot camp, but everyone gets kind of hired and fired from those on a regular basis. So I didn't put too much stock into being a squad leader because I was fired after 3 days anyway, but ended up graduating and kind of moving on.
Like they all got hired and fired.
Yeah, it's just stressful, mental stress.
After boot camp, what was like the next move for you being in the Marines? Like, where did you go? Was it your training school? Like, we call it RA school in the Navy. But
Yep. So the first schoolhouse after leaving the recruit depot is, if you're infantry or combat arms, MOS, you go to ITB, Infantry Training Battalion. If you're a POG, for those who don't know what POGs are, personnel other than grunts, non-infantry types, they go to MCT, which is Marine Combat Training, which is all housed under School of Infantry, SOI. I did SOI West at Camp Pendleton for whatever 5 weeks it was at the time.
And then after going to school, after Camp Pendleton, how does it work in the Marines? Do you get your orders? Do you get stationed somewhere?
Yep, so if you're active duty, after finishing your MCT, SOI, and then your follow-on MOS school, if you have one, you'll get your orders to your active duty parent command. For me, I had ended up enlisting in the reserves, so when I finished MCT and then my follow-on MOS school, I ended up coming back to Arizona, which was kind of a slap in the face because I thought I was going to be able to go do all these cool, grand things, right, that people think of. But I ended up coming back to Arizona, kind of fell back into a regular routine until I had the opportunity to jump on orders to go on active duty and go on my deployment.
How soon was it before you were able to jump on those orders, and where were they to?
So my first set of orders was what they call ADOS orders. So I was just filling an active duty billet or job with the reserve command, doing a lot of community events and kind of being a face and name for the Marine Corps in the community. But from that, the command gets to know who you are. So when those opportunities for a combat deployment come up, like you're the first one to be on that list because they know who you are. So that's what kind of happened with me is I got to go do a lot of cool events as a junior Marine in the community. And then when the opportunity for the combat deployment came up for Afghanistan in 2010, we'll call it, I was one of the first ones on that list. So that was, call it 2 years officially after kind of joining the Marine Corps.
Okay. So had some time to settle in and get
Yep.
an idea of what the Marines stood for.
Yep.
Because I know it's different
Yep.
from the outside of the branches.
Yeah.
And you get like, oh, so this is what it's like.
Yep.
So when you go to Afghanistan, did you go by boat? Did you fly over there? What'd you do?
When we went to Afghanistan, commercial flight. So our active duty orders sent us to Camp Lejeune, North Carolina. We did all our training with the logistics unit that we got attached to our parent command, who was part of 2MEF and the whole push into Afghanistan in 2011. So we went to Camp Lejeune first for, call it 7 months to do all of our workup, all of our training. And then from there, from Lejeune, we flew commercial into Kyrgyzstan. For all the Marines and sailors and service members out there that flew commercial into Afghanistan, I'm sure they're all very familiar with Manas Air Station. It's an Air Force air station. It's an old commercial airport in Kyrgyzstan. But you fly through there, and then you fly a military flight from Manas Air Station in Kyrgyzstan into Afghanistan. So just commercial flight, no boats. Thankfully I never had to do time on ship or anything like that.
What do you remember about when you first landed in Kyrgyzstan?
Kyrgyzstan?
Yeah.
Honestly, not much. That time in transit's kind of a blur because you're on a commercial big 747 with all your gear and weapons for 12, 13 hours. And you don't really get much sleep. So when you fly into Kyrgyzstan, you have kind of like a 2 or 3 day window of, getting some R&R, getting to relax a little bit before you fly back out and go and fly into Afghanistan. So I don't really remember much about flying into Kyrgyzstan. But flying into Afghanistan, you were on a C-47, I think it is, big cargo plane, and we all unloaded, the tailgate drops in the back. And I remember it being hot. I think it was like 100 and we flew in July, I believe it was, July 27th, 2011. And as soon as that back gate opened on the C-47, it was hot. I want to say it was like 120, 125 degrees. And you're fully loaded up with all your gear, carrying your sea bags, all that stuff.
Drenched.
Yep.
What are some of the other senses? I know you said it being hot when you got to Afghanistan, but smell, hearing, taste. What are some things you remember from initially when you got there?
Smell for sure.
Yeah.
All of Afghanistan smells like a sewer. Let's be honest about it. It smells like shit. Smell, not too much sound, because it's where you fly into Camp Leatherneck. It's a big forward operating base. There's the Marines, Army, all the branches on one side, the American side, and then on the other side there's Camp Bastion, which was like the English or the British, the Dutch, the Georgians, all the other kind of NATO forces were on the other side, and then the flight line was next to them. So I don't remember too much sound wise, other than sounding like the the white noise of kind of a operating city.
Once you kind of got settled in, what's the first sort of operations or things that you started playing in? You know, something like your actual missions or jobs out there.
Sure. So yeah, we picked up a lot of missions really quick because my platoon, we were a security platoon, kind of doing a lot of route clearance and running security for the logistics patrols or convoys for all the supplies. We jumped into a pretty heavy operation schedule or a heavy op tempo pretty quickly. Literally within a matter of like 2 weeks, we were on our first mission, and then from there, I'm sure you've heard a couple times from interviewing others, but I'm sure you've heard the term "freedom is outside the wire."
No, I haven't heard that.
Really?
Yet. No.
Yeah. So freedom is outside the wire. So Camp Leatherneck is kind of, again, it's a large forward, military operating base. So while you're there, all the customs and courtesies and standards of like the Marine Corps are there, except for saluting. So you'll always have somebody higher ranking than you kind of yelling at you for doing something stupid, or not wearing your uniform correctly when you're in a combat zone. But when you leave the wire, all those things kind of go out the window, because at that point you're literally in a combat zone, and no one cares what color socks you're wearing. No one cares that maybe you didn't shave for a day or two, or you didn't get a haircut in a week or two. Like, nobody cares about that kind of stuff. So that's where the term freedom is outside the wire comes from, is once you're outside the wire, living out of your truck, your main job at that point is to stay alive, keep your weapons clean, keep your truck clean, and stay operational so you can survive, on mission.
I like it. That's a
Yeah.
cool saying. What's it like kind of that first time going into, and you call this an operation, is that our mission? What would you call it actually going out for like these duties?
Missions.
What's it like going into a mission for the first time and maybe entering like a combat zone for the first time?
It was odd, entering into, again, we'll call it finger quotes combat zone. You're going to get into, call it ticks, or into, call it firefights. I was never in a firefight, so I really can't speak to that too much, but it's happening all around you. And you're always like, hey, we're going to go through this area, and you drive through that area, and you're expecting, you're puckered up, you're ready to go, but then it's kind of a letdown because maybe something didn't happen. I don't want to say luckily enough for us, because I just don't want to put it in those terms, but I guess I'll say like lucky enough for us, we were hitting a lot of IEDs, and when I say a lot, like we were losing 2 or 3 trucks on every single mission, where we were operational, we were getting into little things here and there, so we got to really experience what a lot of guys on, say, the infantry world were experiencing, and we're kind of working with right next to them on any given occasion. Most of our missions were running anywhere from a week to a month long, so we were literally living out of our truck for anywhere from 2-3 weeks to a month.
What's it like driving through all the villages out there?
Crazy. A lot of kids.
A lot of kids.
The older adults, just because they've experienced war, we'll call it, in Afghanistan for centuries. The kids are always very interested. So when you drive through, anywhere from literally probably 5 years old to 15, they're running after your truck, trying to jump on your truck, pull gear off, and you quite literally have to stop. And few incidences where the gunner in my truck would have to keep a little bucket of rocks in his turret, because as kids are coming and running up on your truck, you can't have them pulling gear off your truck, so they would grab rocks and throw rocks at them to keep them off your truck. But the kids were interesting, because when you did, the few opportunities that I did get to dismount, you get to have a kind of a cool experience, kind of a face-to-face. And yeah, you can't talk to them because there's that language barrier, but it's kind of interesting to see the kids is a big thing. The adults kind of stayed away from you because they understood what they were there for, but the kids, like, oh, this is something new and exciting, and get to kind of interact with them was kind of fun sometimes.
Was there any moment where you felt a little sketched out or a lot of pressure while going through some of those like little communities or even the larger ones?
Yeah, one in particular comes to mind. Um, I'm sure we've all heard of, the 3rd Battalion, 5th Marines in Sangin in 2010, 11. We were out there a little bit after them, operating up into Sangin River Valley in the Sangin district. And then on the opposite side of what they call the tabletop, it's kind of a big hill that flattens out. And on the opposite side is the Western Cluster. That was kind of where things kind of hit home for us. One of the first IEDs that my buddy of mine hit, he was the lead scout vehicle in a big 7-ton with a mine roller. I nearly bawled my eyes out because he was, I don't know, probably maybe about a mile ahead of me. I was in a security truck in the rear, and like boom, you see the cloud of smoke, and on the radio, you don't hear comms from them because they kind of go dark for, a few minutes, and all you can think is the worst, right? But we did a mission from Sangin across the tabletop into the Western Cluster, and that's where we really got into quite a bit of kind of, we'll call it stressful situations. The Georgians who were on that side and the Marines who were over there were always getting into a lot of firefights, a lot of ambushes, hitting an IED, and then within a matter of a half hour, the Taliban would be on the radio, like, hey, we got an IED hit, come ambush them, basically. We never got into that, thankfully. We were just hitting a lot of IEDs. But yeah, the Western Cluster, my buddy Ryan hit an IED, and I wasn't sure how to handle it at first. He ended up being fine, but that IED that he hit and the rest of our convoy, as we rolled through into the Western Cluster to drop supplies, we ended up hitting, I want to say, like 6 or 7 IEDs. We lost like 6 or 7 trucks. We had one Marine who was medevaced. He was dismounted. His truck had hit an IED, and he took shrapnel to the leg. That was probably the most kinetic, we'll call it, mission we had. And I think it was the same one we ended up going combat ineffective because we lost so many vehicles, and we were just sitting up on top of the tabletop I mentioned, just sitting there for 3 or 4 days because we had to wait for an Army route clearance platoon to come escort us back out of there.
Wow. Were you scared at all during that time?
I don't know that scared is the right word. Was I nervous? Anxious? Yes. Scared? No. One thing that we all dealt with a lot was a lot of downtime. So there's a lot of build-up to what you're about to go do, but then there's a lot of letdown. So at any given moment, like, you never know what you're going to hit, what you're going to encounter. You're just so focused on, driving your truck, staying in your lane, if you will. Driving your truck, making sure your truck is good, your weapon is good, your team is good. That's kind of all you worry about. Listen to a lot of music, watch a lot of movies, and just kind of try to stay as calm as possible because you're so kind of amped up, ready for what could happen. So again, I don't think that scared is the right word. It's more just anxious and nervous.
What's the craziest thing you remember from your time over there?
Probably craziest thing, we were en route, headed back after, I think it was like a 3 or 4 week mission. We were headed back from Sangin back to Camp Leatherneck, and we were headed down Route 611. So there's 2 kind of main highways in Afghanistan. Route 1 runs east to west. Route 611 runs north and south along the Garmsir district and Sangin River Valley. We were headed down Route 611, which was known for a lot of IEDs, but it was hardball. It was paved. But the insurgents, the Taliban, would put like big 200, 300, 400-pound IEDs in the culverts underneath and just, blow you up. Thankfully, we had good, I don't say we as in us personally, but, we always had good air cover, good air assets who were seeing what was going on as we were rolling through. And we were rolling through just as it was getting dark, and whoever the air asset was saw some guys who were putting an IED in a culvert underneath the paved hardball, and up ahead of us, probably about a mile, if that, you can see the propellers, the props on the helos coming in. They did an airstrike on the insurgents or the Taliban who were implementing that IED. And we drove through, we let them do their thing. We got, call on the radio, what's going on, kind of stand fast where you're at, let them do the airstrike, rockets coming in from, and we're watching this from, again, maybe a mile away, if that. Rockets coming from the Cobra helicopters, them getting blown up. And we rode through, and, you look out, when we looked through, we rolled by, opened our doors, and the compound was next to them, and there's, dead insurgents, Taliban, blown to 30 different pieces next to the road. And that was probably the most exciting and interesting part for ourselves. But at any given time when we were at any of the patrol bases in the Sangin district or the Western Cluster, there was always firefights going on, and we could either hear them, or in Sangin we were at Fob Nole a lot, which is up on top of a hill. And then right next to Fob Nole is Fob Robinson, Fob Rob, which was like a MARSOC recon, Marine Corps Special Operations base. Well, because they were just below us on a hill, we would get to sit, we were just chilling, on base in between missions, kind of hanging out in our trucks, but we were above everybody, so we would watch them get into firefights and they would shoot RPGs. The Taliban would shoot RPGs up the hill at Fob Rob, and they would do a lot of back and forth. So we got to experience a lot of, firefights, but without having to really be involved in them. So it was kind of a cool experience.
What's it? Give me some details on just seeing like what that airstrike looks like, and maybe like the rockets flying from the RPGs too.
For the RPG, that was kind of during the day. You don't really see it. You just hear the explosion. Because again, we don't have direct eyes on it. We're sitting, maybe a mile or two away up on top of a hill watching it. So you see the tracer rounds go back and forth, and you can hear a lot going on. And sometimes you can catch radio traffic about what they're doing, but you don't really get to experience or see, like, say, the RPG. When it came to the airstrike that came from, like, the Cobras, it was dark out. So other than the tracers or the, call it the explosion or the fire from the rockets coming out the back, you don't really get to see it because, again, it was dark out. But still, when you're there, you understand what's going on. So even though you don't get to, like, visualize it, it's still a really cool experience to, like, hey, this is how the Marine Corps operates as a whole. And I think that's the biggest takeaway for me that I think a lot of Marines don't get to experience is the big picture about how the big green machine operates. It's like, yeah, we were just truck drivers. And I say just to kind of give credit to others, but, we're truck drivers operating a logistics convoy. But you're working directly with, the infantry guys on the ground, working directly with the air assets in the air, doing the call for fire or calling in medevac, stuff like that. So it was a kind of a cool experience to be in, to be a part of everything, but not be directly involved, if that makes sense.
How did you describe the Taliban, like how they fought and just them as a whole?
How would I describe the Taliban? How they fight? Dirty.
Dirty.
Yeah, you don't see them. From my experience, we never saw them. But a lot of the IEDs that we were hitting were command det. So they would place it in the ground, run a wire, however far away. And as soon as you roll over it, they usually have like a little ticker, or like a cell phone or something, and they, make it go off that way when you roll over it. As far as like when it came to firefights, again, I've never really been in a direct firefight. A tail end of a couple of our convoys would, take a few pop shots here and there. But from experience with the guys on the ground that we were working with, like, you never saw them. They would, stick their AKs over the wall and kind of do a few pop shots at you, but they didn't mess too much with a lot of the convoys, we'll call it, just because we would roll anywhere from 10 to 30 vehicles deep. And out of those 10 to 30 vehicles, we'll call it more than half of them would be security vehicles. all with 50 cals, 240s, machine guns, and grenade launchers. So not too many guys want to mess with the firepower that's carried in a convoy, just because you're not going to last.
Yeah. I'm just thinking of that many vehicles driving through.
Yeah, yeah. Our convoys would be anywhere from, maybe a mile long, just because of dispersion between the vehicles. Anywhere between a mile to sometimes 4 or 5 miles long. We rolled pretty deep a lot of times.
Wow. What's it like when you get back to base that last time and you're sort of starting the transition back home, like you're starting to get done with your orders and finish up?
It's hard. I think that's the hardest part about a combat deployment in general, especially if you've been outside the wire, where you're so used to living out of your truck and not having to worry about, what color socks you're wearing, or, what if you have a fresh shave for the day or a haircut or anything like that. All of a sudden you have to go from that back to normal customs and courtesies and Marine Corps regulations, and it's hard to get back into that. So like you get back to Camp Leatherneck and we're gonna start retrograding, pack up your stuff, here's our flight times, here's whatever, and then you get back to Camp Lejeune too. It's kind of a slap in the face, and I think that's the hardest part about serving during that time, was there's so much expected of you to be this, but then you got to be this at the same time, or you got to do that transition like overnight.
What is your input on war now?
I don't know. Being kind of the history buff that I am, I would do it again in a heartbeat, but not for any political purpose, just to go, hang out with the boys again. The camaraderie, the brotherhood that comes with it, spending time literally in a truck for 7-8 months straight with the same guys. You get to kind of build that brotherhood, if you will. Would I do that over again? 100 times over. Politically, which I won't dive too deep into, knowing what we all know now about Iraq, Afghanistan, a couple of the missions that we did run and the purpose behind them, I would keep a quadruple arms distance from the military and doing that again.
And when you think back on your whole time in Afghanistan and just in the military overall, what's like the one thing you would say is just like comes to mind first that stuck with you the most?
Something that stuck with me the most from the whole time in.
For your whole time, boot camp, combat.
What I learned about staying calm, being a leader. Luckily, on and off active duty, going on a combat deployment, getting the opportunity to lead Marines, knowing that they know that, hey, Staff Sergeant Warhol went and did this. So he has that experience, and knowing that you're humble about it, the leadership traits that come with it, and being able to stay calm in a kind of a hostile connect environment, or when things go crazy, that kind of carries with you. So whether it be for a lot of veterans and myself, whether it be at home, you're dealing with stress, or you're at work dealing with stress, knowing how to navigate and mitigate that and be a professional. I think that's the biggest thing. I was lucky to have some very good leaders that I worked with and worked under that, hey, I want to be like that guy. And you saw the bad leaders too, right? Who, hey, I don't want to be like that. I don't want to be that guy that's yelling and screaming at everybody. That's not who I am. That's not what we do. You get to learn what good and bad leadership is, and you get to kind of carry that with you.